Thank you so much for this opportunity. I am Emily Tasinato, and I got a bachelor degree in international studies at the University of Trento with a major in political and international organization. During these 3 years, I focused especially on the case study of the European Union, its process of integration, its political and sociological challenges in the future. But concurrently, I'm starting getting very interested in the changing geopolitics of the Middle East. And as a result, I decided to attend a double degree program in international relation and comparative analysis of the Mediterranean societies between the University of Torino in Italy and the Faculty of Governance, Economics and Social Sciences at Mohammed VI Polytechnic University in Morocco. And during my experience in Torino, I had also the possibility to attend a sort of academic minor in migration studies in order to enforce and to deepen my knowledge about migratory phenomena. Currently, I'm attending a specializing master in Middle Eastern Studies at the Graduate School of Economics and International Relations in Milan. And what can I add? Yes, I'm research fellow at the Square Center and deepen the studies on revolutionary and social movements across the Mediterranean region, so including Europe, Middle East, and North Africa.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's very exciting to hear about your work, and thanks for that great introduction. It's very interesting how you moved from sort of European-centric studies to something a bit more Middle Eastern centered. And perhaps what I'm interested in is what exactly are your research interests?
During my two years master degree program, I've become increasingly interested in the geopolitical dynamics of the Persian Gulf region, with a focus obviously on Iran. That is a country that I'm trying to deepen both in its pre-revolutionary and post-revolutionary phase from a political, historical, socio-cultural, and geostrategic point of view. And indeed, my master thesis dealt with the role played by the Strait of Hormuz in the history of the militarization and securitization of the Persian Gulf. And more specifically, I tried to analyze Iran's perception of the strategic choke point in a historical and legal perspective.
Hmm.
So the idea of the research project starts from my deepened interest in geopolitics, and more particularly how effectively space is a key feature in shaping international relations. And I
Hmm.
think that the case of the Strait of Hormuz is emblematic in this sense.
No, that's very, very
And
important.
yeah,
I know, and it's
it's
also very topical as well. Sorry, I think the internet is a little bit slow on my end.
yeah,
So
no,
sorry.
don't worry.
I know. I was just saying that it's very important because of what's happening today, with the militarization of the Persian Gulf. So it's a very topical research
Yes,
interest. A lot of things are
yeah,
happening.
and yeah, one the main aspect that, for example, I try to highlight during in writing this thesis is that in the case of the Strait of Hormuz, for example, we
Hmm.
can see that even before being the main transit channel of about 40% of the global oil currently traded by
Hmm.
sea, this strategic checkpoint constitute the only maritime connector between
Hmm.
this Persian Sea and the Indian Ocean.
Hmm. That's
The
true.
morphology of the Persian Gulf itself defines firstly the geostrategic role played by this trade union. And this is an
Hmm.
aspect that I try to stress out in every page of my thesis devoted to the analysis of the role played by the Strait of Hormuz from a
Hmm.
historical point of view. For example,
Hmm.
during the Portuguese of the British
Uh-huh.
period before the
Sure.
discovering of oil, we can
Hmm.
see how the Strait of Hormuz was perceived as a sort of a buffer zone. I
Hmm.
mean,
Hmm.
a geographical space useful in order to maintain control of the shipping
Mm-hmm.
lanes in the Indian Ocean and to
Yes.
defend a Portuguese before and British after settlements along the western coast of India. And after the
Oh, fascinating.
discovery of oil in Qajar, Persia, at the beginning of the 20th century, this is a sort of turning point because
Mm-hmm.
the oil gives the Strait of Hormuz a new strategic role. And
Mm-hmm.
again, space is a key feature and is very relevant in order to
Yes.
understand why the strait is so important for Iran, why it's so important for the world, and
Mm-hmm.
also the
Absolutely.
legal dispute that around the strait is emblematic in this sense.
And it's you're absolutely right. It's very important, and bringing that historical perspective, I think, just deepens our understanding of what's happening in that region today. So thank you
Mhm.
for that. But and what led you to pursue this topic for your master's dissertation? I mean, you've spoken about your interest on the geopolitical makeup of the Persian Gulf, but were there other factors that interested you?
My thesis was divided into three parts. In the first
Hmm.
one, I analyzed the Persian Gulf from historical perspective,
Yes.
mainly analyzing the Portuguese British presence and
Right.
after so-called process of Iranization of the Strait
Mm-hmm.
of Hormuz. And in
Mm-hmm.
the second part, I tried to analyze the legal aspect because in my leitmotif of the old
Mm-hmm.
my master thesis is space. And also from a legal point of view, we can see the strong relationship between
Mm-hmm.
um, the regime of navigation in a strait like Hormuz that are international streets and the importance of space, so the issue of freedom of navigation of the shipping
Mm-hmm.
lanes that
Mm-hmm.
inevitably becomes one of the main priorities in the political agendas, both of the oil-dependent
Right.
extra-regional powers and of the oil export-dependent regional actors. And this is very important
Mm-hmm.
because, for
Yeah, of
example,
course.
because of the Iranian non-ratification of the
Mm-hmm.
United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea in 1982, the
Mm-hmm.
transit of foreign commercial and warships in the Strait of Hormuz is not yet regulated by an appropriate
Right.
regulatory regime. And this is very important because from one side, the strait morphology, and from the other one, also this legal dispute around the Strait of Hormuz, were
Mm.
relevant political implication for the
Absolutely.
stability of the Gulf region. And this is
Mm-hmm.
why I think that in order to also to understand the international relation, I
Mm-hmm.
think the space is very important because shape
Sure.
is able to shape and contribute to shape and to define also the international relation. And I
Mm.
think that is very emblematic, the study of the Strait of Hormuz, because, for example, also the repeated Iranian threat to block international navigation in the
Yeah.
strait, together with the guerrilla actions and the military drills, for example,
Mm.
Velayat or Great Prophet, carried out by the Islamic
Mm.
Revolutionary Corps Navy in the Persian Gulf, in
Sure.
Hormuz, and the Gulf of Oman,
Mm-hmm.
are the main feature of a sort of psychological war that
Yeah,
the in yeah that
definitely.
the country that Tehran is fighting against United States and its
Yeah.
regional and regional allies. And
Mm-hmm.
so also the political and military messages sent by the
Mm-hmm.
Iranian authorities, the international
Mm-hmm.
community.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, we can close the Strait of Hormuz. I
Mm.
think that is also
Yeah.
an attempt to make the country a sort of credible actor. I mean, a state that is not only has the capabilities but also the will and also the narrative around the
Mm-hmm.
possibility and the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz. So it's
Mm.
embedded this narrative in order to make Iran a credible actor and an actor that want have the capabilities and want to really close the Strait of Hormuz. And
Yeah.
so all the process
Interesting.
of militarization with the international maritime security construct,
Mm-hmm.
or for example with the European Union-led European maritime awareness
Mm-hmm.
in the Strait of Hormuz, that are sort of coalition in order to promote freedom of navigation, are
Mm-hmm.
contributing to this process of militarization and so securitization of the Persian Gulf region. And
Wow.
the Strait of Hormuz is like a litmus test
Yes,
of
that's
this
true. Yeah.
process of
Yes.
militarization and securitization.
Mm,
Yeah, I think it's a good metaphor in order to describe the role played by
absolutely.
Hormuz.
No,
Yeah, and this is my
it's a good way. It's a good way to describe it.
okay. Thank you.
And I think it's also interesting because the Strait of Hormuz is one of the few places in this world where Iran can interact with other nations, especially the United States, in terms of a space. This is where they do directly confront each other.
Yeah, because of the Strait of Hormuz in its narrowest point of 21 nautical miles is included both in territorial water of Iran
Hmm.
and Oman, and
Hmm.
is completely bounded on the north by Iran. So
Mm,
inevitably the clash, the confrontation with the other countries
mm.
in
It's
part of the
close, isn't
reality
it?
everyday life.
That's great. Thank you so much. It's wonderful. I'm looking forward to hopefully reading more from your work and from your research. And I think a lot of people who are listening will also be very, very interested in that. And for you, what has been, your main surprises and challenges studying Iran
Studying Iran and
or the
writing
Persian
my
Gulf as well? Yes.
master's thesis, I think that the main surprise is a kind of continuity between the Pahlavi monarchy and the new Islamic Republic for
Very
what concerns, for
interesting.
example, the pragmatic approach adopted by the
Mm,
country in shaping foreign relations, or also the core pillars of domestic policy that essentially have remained unchanged. I mean, security, territorial
mm-hmm,
integrity,
mm-hmm,
defense of airspace
mm-hmm,
and maritime space. And there is also a sort of huge paradox, I think, when Iran said,
mm-hmm.
no, we don't want to interfere in the foreign affairs of the other country is a sort of paradox because if we consider how Iran is present in the major scenario in proxy wars such in Yemen and Syria.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
yeah,
It's
is a
interesting.
sort it's a sort of paradox. But I think that
Mm,
the main surprise for me is this sort of continuum. A quick, for example, um, the policy adopted by the Pahlavi administration and the Ayatollah's one in maintaining the full control of the Strait
mm-hmm,
of Hormuz and its island,
mm,
the so-called Arch of Defense. So I'm referring to the island of Hormuz, Larak, Hengam, Abu
mm.
Musa, Greater and Lesser Tomb.
Yeah.
Um, it's perceived as a process of Iranization in the Strait of
Mm-hmm,
Hormuz. And this
mm-hmm,
process is something that's not started after the Iranian Revolution, but it was present also in 17th. And
mm,
this is very important because sometimes we think, okay, Iranian Revolution is the turning point,
mm-hmm,
but I think that what really changed it is the relationship between Iran and the Western actors, namely the United States.
mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm,
for what concern the perception, the strategical role of the Strait of Hormuz for Iranian interest, nothing changed. And we
mm,
can see also this aspect, for example, during the third conference of the Law of the Sea. That is a conference that started in 1973. So when
mm-hmm.
Iran was under Mohammad
Yeah.
Reza Pahlavi and finished in 1983. So after the rise of Khomeini. And
Right.
despite this regime change, the cornerstone of the Iranian delegation was the same. So the
Ah.
refusal of the principle of the transit passage, that was a principle elaborated by the United Kingdom in 1975, if I don't remember well, in order to achieve a sort of compromise between maritime powers from one side and coastal states from the other. And the transit passage in straits like Hormuz, there
Mhm,
are international straits, is a relevant issue for security and
mhm,
strategies in Iran. And also the current, for example, the current dispute with the two emirates of Ras al-Sharika and Ras al-Khaimah concerning the three islands, Abu
Mm-hmm.
Musa, Greater and Lesser Khartoum, is
Mm-hmm.
something that is a
Mm.
dispute that continues, still persists, but started during
That's
Pahlavi
true.
administration. Yeah,
Mm.
and
That's fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, and for me, it was a surprise because before starting to write and before starting to collect papers, books in order to write my master thesis, I thought that the turning point was the Iranian Revolution, and so for
Mm-hmm.
me it was a
Mm-hmm.
surprise, and I would like to analyze it and to deepen this aspect.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think you've touched on a very important point because a lot of us who study Iran, we come into the field thinking that 1979 was a fresh page for Iranian politics and international relations. And then when you look deeper, you realize that there was so much continuity
Exactly.
between the two regimes. So I think that's something that we're still exploring, I think, as a field and still realizing. Thank you. Your answers have been great so far, and I'm learning so much just listening to you. So thank you very, very much. But perhaps as a final question, I could ask is what you'd like to do after your masters. Are you considering to stay on, or what would you like to do?
So after my master experience, I would like to carry out an internship, hopefully in Iranian Research Institute somewhere in the Middle East. I don't know.
Okay.
Uh, but however, the idea, for example, of staying in academia is an option not be overlooked. And
Yes.
indeed, I don't exclude, I don't exclude, for example, the possibility to make application for a PhD.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, at this point, I've not elaborated a research project yet.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
if I had to think about a potential PhD project, many ideas come to my mind. For
Mm-hmm.
instance, I will interested in to deepen the role played by by space in shaping and define Iran's role in the realm of international relation. But for
Mm-hmm.
example, I would like also to deepen the public space, so the public space inside the country, the urban
Mm-hmm.
space, and
Mm-hmm.
how this space could be used or instrumentalized by social and political actors to achieve their purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And could be another type of research project.
Mm.
Another idea, for example, that given the current state of hostility between Israel and Iran, I would like to investigate the Israel-Iranian
Mm.
cooperation and confrontation from historical perspective, because the
Sure.
history is one of my first passion. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe PhD in history could be useful in order to
Mm-hmm.
combine my two passions for history, the
Mm.
history of Iran, especially the Pahlavi period,
Mm-hmm.
and and my love for international relation,
Mm-hmm.
geopolitics.
Yeah, and
But
interesting.
it's just an
But
idea, so nothing
yeah, no,
definitive.
no. No, we'll have to
We'll
watch this
see.
space. We'll have to watch the space. Either way, I think you're on a good path, and your research will have a lot of impact, not only in academia but also in policy making and so on, because it's very topical and it's very contemporary. So I'm very interested to see where you go with this, and I hope you'll keep the conversation with us, and we can keep
Thank
talking.
you so much.
Yeah, I really
Thank
appreciate your
you.
time and thank you so much for your wonderful answers. Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. And again, you're making a great job with the Iranian Studies Collective, and it's a precious source for everyone who is interested
Oh,
in analyze and deepen Iran. So thank you so much.
you're so welcome.